Hello and welcome to Girls Gaming, and this is from the Depths Designer, where we're going to have a look at some engine types. Now the first thing I'm going to do is turn the sound down, although I'll do it in post-editing. I'm going to do it in the game because the sound being right next to an engine like this can be somewhat annoying. Okay, now that I've got the sound to something which isn't constantly droning in my ears, after the last campaign episode, resource management became an issue because we run out of resources. Now, the biggest, I wouldn't say the biggest, or one of the reasons was the engines we were using and just getting the efficiency, because these were just starting to emulate the old triple expansion piston steam engines. So what I'd like to look at first of all is just engine types and the efficiencies of them, how to improve efficiencies, etc. Now for this test I haven't gone stupid size engines. I'm trying to keep what can you do in a reasonable size of 8 to be about 5. What is to be expected in that size area? Obviously, bigger area, more power, and in some cases, better efficiency. So first off, we'll look at the steam engines and just get an idea of how they are. Now, I'm going to bring on the UI for most of this. So steam engines work quite simply, for those that may not know. You have a boiler with a control, and on the control you set a burn rate of how much resources per second is burned in that boiler. So imagine that's constantly putting in coal to the boiler to build up the steam. Steam goes into the pistons by the pipes, turns the crank, which produces energy at the gearbox assembly here. You can also put flywheels on to generate for electricity, but we'll go into that as a separate later on as such. Right, so I'm using a control block here just to turn on all of them at the same time. So this is just an example of the 2-meter pistons. So this is running at full burn rate of 0.5 materials. So we're running, basically burning 2 materials a second here. And one thing that you have to be careful of is, although this shows 3000, nearly 700 power, that's not actually usable power, because as soon as you put a load, that will decrease. So we'll go over here and put a little simple shield on, which is going to give us a simple 3000 power. Now you can see that the pistons have started slowing down, and they're actually only giving 1900 power out. And the shield is blinking on and off because it can't quite keep up with that power rate. So that's one thing to be aware of. Always test engines under load, whether it's steam engine or fuel engines, to get a more true appearance. So the power that's coming here is 1900. If we put a flywheel on this, this would also be producing that amount of power to batteries. So, but at the moment we're using kinetic energy, which is used straight away, doesn't need to be stored in a battery, etc. So that works out at one important thing is we've got to come to a common ratio. So that's 1905 is about 954, 55 power per resource point. So basically half, because this is burning about 2. So that's the 2 meter. Now in the same sort of area, but obviously costing a little bit more, is the 4 meter and large boilers. Now basically they take up more space, so this is relatively space efficient for 2000 power. This is still fairly space efficient, if we bring this up to full power, so as you can see, one thing here is these are taking a lot longer to spin up compared to the small pistons. Small pistons span up relatively quickly. These are taking a lot longer to build up pressure in the boiler. The rear boiler at the moment is not used, that is at 0, so it's not having an effect. This is the only boilers that are operational at this moment, so just for this first test. So already we can see this is producing a lot more power. The burn rate is 4.3, so it is double the burn rate, as would be expected for, you know, it's producing double the power. Now, this would mean we could up the power of this. So let's see how much power, usable power. So it's starting to go off there. So about 3,900 power is usable power. Oops. So 4,230 or so. It's still going up a little bit as it's building up some more burn rate. So basically that's 980 power per resource point. Slightly more efficient than the 2 meter, but still, you know, close. It's similar sort of burn rates. Now I'm going to set this down again to about 3,000. I think is a good test value. So that's a good test value. So what could we do? There is a couple of other things you can do to make these steam engines more efficient. First of all is reduce, because one problem is this is burning even if the power is not used. So because I've reduced the shield, this is producing more power. And it's not used, it's wasted, but we're still burning away all this fuel. So there is another way to do that, and using basically more boilers that we have at the back here. So we've got a much larger boiler. We can store up the steam for its use. So we use a couple of control blocks. The first one here is when the power down in the bottom right hand corner goes below a certain level, and here we've set 15%, set the boilers to go full power or full burn rate, and that's going to now do that for both boilers. So this rear boiler is now set to start burning, and it's going to burn a lot of fuel. So this is like shoveling in the coal. Now if we just let that go, it's going to produce way too much power, and you do have to make sure you are producing excess power. So we're producing a lot of power, and we're actually going to potentially overspin. Yep, you may be able to hear the pistons are starting to damage. So we need another controller, which basically come here, but hopefully before they blow up, which reduces the power. Didn't quite get there in time. They are now going down. So it's now reduced the boiler. So the boilers are now not burning any materials. They're using the steam that's stored up in this boilers, and they're still producing power. Oops, they still took a bit of damage, but we'll repair them. Okay, so they're still producing power. We're still producing excess power, but it's from steam that has been built up. So it is steadily going down. Our shield is working adequately. And as the power comes down, it takes quite a while for the power to come down. And to be honest, the more pistons and rotational mass you add to this, the longer it takes for it to cool down, almost having like a flywheel effect. So now once the power goes down to a low enough level, so there we go, it's now turned the boilers back on. So we'll get a few seconds, or a bit more than a few seconds, of full burn rate again, and then reduce. Now one good or semi-good is this will sort of adjust to your power usage to a degree. So if I reduce the power usage here, we'll take it down to just 1000. First of all, the boilers will get up to a good operational pressure quicker. So basically they will, the pressure in the boiler will get to a point where this is, depending on the setting you set in this controller, is you're producing 70% more power than you need. And then it will allow it to come down. So it's in a pulse, basically. And think of it like the stokers in the ship are shoveling in the coal. Now you could also create more control blocks so that they are set at different levels and increasing amounts to allow for higher and lower what should we say, power usage rates. So you could have one that's set only cut down only to half if it, at a certain point, or say if the first one hits 15%, only sets it to 0.5. If it's still not enough by it gets to 5%, then go up to full 0.1. So there's quite a few options you can do to pulse this, but this is just a simple setup. Okay, let me just disable these quickly. So another usable power system is electric engines. Now electric engines basically store their power in batteries. So again, I've done an 8v5, and the batteries need to be charged up. There's a couple of ways you can charge the batteries up. You could use this piston system here in the steam engines, and you can put a flywheel onto the end of these, and it would generate electricity to be used by the batteries, to charge up the batteries. The electric engine itself is quite handy in that you can set a percentage power output which affects the efficiency. So if you can set it at a nice, say 20%, you get 167% efficiency on the engine, and the total creatable power is based upon the number of batteries. So let's say we want around the 3200 mark. There we go, 50%. Okay, so now that's providing 3200 power, and if we now make sure that this is going to be using about 3200, now you can see that the battery, the amount of power that's contained in the battery is going down as it is being used. So the available power is also being used. So what you have to do initially, when it's at 100%, is set it higher, so you're still producing your 3200 as the battery goes down. So you might want to find a value so that at 50% power, it's still producing 3200 power. So we're going to go to full power, and you can see it's producing now enough energy. Now luckily the engine drain is only based upon the actual level of usage. So our usage here is 3100, so it's going to be only using that equivalent on its power usage. But as you can see, it's a lot less efficient, or it's 100%, it's not extra efficient. And as it's going down, our excess power is coming down as well. And on the right hand side you can see the power icon, second bar down, red bar, and you can see that's getting lower and lower. So we now need to charge up the batteries. So we would either have a steam, or here we're going to use a turbine. So this is the small steam turbine. Again, load of boilers, 4x3 boilers. If I now set these all to burn at full rate, they're starting to build up pressure, and you can see there's an amount of energy per second is being created here. And their burn rate is 0.5, so they're going to be producing, let's see what their end producing. Their end production is very similar to the 2-meter pistons for this size of turbine. So it's getting close. It takes a while still to build up pressure, and you can actually now see they actually are producing excess energy. So it's actually charging the batteries quicker than it's being used by the shield. And we're up to 3,000. It's quite efficient at the moment, 3,400, and still going. Let's just let it get to its stable point, and then we'll see what its actual power to resource usage rate is. So after a bit of time, it has sort of stabilised. I reckon it's just stabilised about 3,800. So that means the turbine is going to be using about producing 1,900 power per resource point used by the boilers, which is effectively double the efficiency of the pistons. So in this particular, this is quite simply double the effectiveness of the piston setup. Now again, at the moment it's wasting energy. You could create a ACB, which basically, based on the battery, if the value is high, so let's say we're back up to 98%, then the burn rate set to 0. So now the battery is at 100%. These have all turned to 0, but they still have pressure. So this is still producing electricity, still charging up the battery whilst the turbine cools down. So the efficiency is a little bit more than 1,900. The battery is now draining, and then you could set the ACB to once reverse this, so that once it was below, say, 50%, go back and power up again and power up the boilers. So that's how you could set it to just keep on bouncing up as the battery needs power. I'm going to turn that off for the moment so that just actually cools down and stops providing power, and I'm going to just put that to 0 for the moment. So the next type of engine available is the fuel engines, which use fuel instead of resources. But to have a common way of defining the efficiencies of each of the different engine systems, we need to have a common base point. So the first point is that, or the first stage is that fuel is created from resources using a refinery. Now I've got a simple refinery here, which you can be more efficient, but this is just 10 cokers and 10 crackers and desalter in a refinery, lots of stacks. You can go bigger. This is just a medium point, I think, just a starting rather than the most efficient, but it works. And this, basically, according to this, is using 10 materials every 134 seconds, and it produces, from that 10 units of materials, 2,640 fuel. So 1 unit of resources is 264 fuel. So that is the 264 is the fuel to resource ratio. Now, I realise you've got to transport the fuel, but you've got to transport resources as well. So that's a bit of a. We're just going to use that figure as a starting point for our calculations. Now, before I go on one little further, one important thing to remember if you're building ships is fuel storage tanks. Now, a normal resource container can hold 500 resources, although it is settable in your options. The default, I believe, is 500 per block, and costs 2 materials to build the box, and then it fills with resources. When you build a fuel block, they can contain 1,000 fuel per block, but they cost you 100 materials. So that's a ratio of 10 to 1, which is a lot less than the 264. Unfortunately, there is no option to build the fuel containers empty. Why is this important? If you fill your ship full of fuel containers and then you get damage on those fuel containers, to repair them, you have to repair them with fuel inside, which means that they are now costing a lot of resources from whatever is your repair budget. So your supposed fuel efficiency is a hell of a lot less. So in other words, you have to protect your oil resources, almost like ammo, because they are very expensive to replace compared to your normal fuel efficiency. 26 times more expensive than replacing the equivalent resource. Well, 13 times I think. But anyway, so resource containers can be used almost as de facto ammo in your ship. Fuel you'll want to protect. Okay, so we've got the refinery and this value of 264, and anyone can check my maths. That would be a good start. So fuel engines themselves are based on a basic engine generator here, and I'm just going to I'll just activate this engine, and then you have a cylinder in the center there with an exhaust pipe sticking out. Now this is what I've done here is I've used some superchargers around it connected to carburetors. Now, to create power from your cylinder, you either put a carburetor or a fuel injector. So I have quickly built up a small example engine using injectors, which are the most powerful but fuel inefficient way of making an engine. So we have a cylinder in the center with an exhaust and then 4 injectors. Now you can't make any changes to injectors, they are just the way they are. And then we've got lots of cooling, because you need to keep cooling to ensure that the engine will not blow up, basically. Now, initially at 100%, it's showing that it should have a power per unit of fuel of 73. But if we put it under load, whoops, we can see the engine's going up and the actual power per fuel is nearer to 52. Let me just turn that off again. So our actual power per fuel was actually 52 power per fuel unit. And if we're getting 264 fuel units per resource, that means we're actually getting 52 times 264. Anyone want to check my maths on that? Please feel free. Make sure I'm not going silly, because that works out at 13,728 power per resource unit. Now, the steam engines and even the turbines over here, we were looking at a power per resource unit of at best 1900, even if you started pulsing the engines. That's a tremendous difference in power, even for the most inefficient fuel engine possible. It seems a little too big a difference to me, but you know, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, and if I'm miscalculating that, then so be it. Okay, couple of things to look at is then in fuel engines themselves there is effectively 3 ways you can make fuel or make the power. First one, and to make it more efficient, there's 2 ways of making power. Let's get this right. There's 2 ways of making power, and then there is basically 2 additional ways of making it more efficient. So the 2 ways of making power is the injector or the carburetor. So injectors produce 200 units per injector attached to a cylinder, and a carburetor produces 100 power per carburetor connected to a cylinder. So this one here had a potential of 800 but actually only gave out 560, so do remember you've got an inefficiency. And this one here with 4 carburetors has a theoretical maximum of 399. Now, efficiencies can then be added using either superchargers or turbochargers. Now, this isn't the way it should really work in real life, so just go with what the game gives you rather than arguing over engine mechanics, because I do have issues with it, but hey, it's a game, so we go with what we've got. So basically we have here is the superchargers work at low power and the turbochargers work at high RPM or high power. So what I mean by that is if we go in here and we look at the power per fuel per second, you'll notice here there is a steep decline on this particular system, as all of the superchargers are most efficient at these much lower RPMs, and then the power per fuel gets lower as it gets higher in the RPM range. So you'll see that in the chart where it goes from 235 to 90. And this is based on 2 superchargers per carburetor. And in comparison, the turbos here, which have 2 turbos per carburetor, the line is a lot flatter, but it goes the opposite. It's not as steep. So we're going from 119, so it's less efficient at lower revs, but it's getting better as it goes higher. Now, again, we do not put it under load because the figures are not correct at these load levels. So if I give it power, so here at 29%, we're getting 191 power per fuel, which equates to about 50,000, over 50,000 power per resource unit, in my calculations. If we then put this up to maximum, you see this is going down to 85, which is actually going a little bit lower. Let's say 84. So 84 at 264, so that's 22,000, which is still damn good. 22,000 power per fuel. We'll take that one down for the moment. Now the turbo. The turbo at 100% is actually gone 192, so it's actually increased, which is 50,000. If I take it down to a lower RPM, let's take it down to 25%. 151 is 39, so this is actually more efficient at high RPMs than it is at low RPM. So you don't want this running when at low RPMs, you want the other system to be running. Anyway, that is how the efficiency works with turbos and superchargers. Let me just turn these off for a second. So now with turbos, one of the elements I didn't show on the first one is how the inline turbos actually increase efficiency as you join more of them together. So the more turbos you have, the more efficient it gets. So the bigger the engine, the more efficient. Again, this is not strictly true, but hey, it's the game. Now, a couple of designs, again, looking at power density compared to the steam engines, we've already ascertained that the fuel engines are more efficient than the steam engines by quite a considerable factor, but getting the power out of them takes more. Now this design here, which again we're in a 5B8 roughly, we've got a maximum value of about 3,200 power. Now we'll put it under load to see what we're. Now this is a purely very simple supercharged engine. So every carburetor has about 4 superchargers, some a little bit less. It's a mixture. It's using 89 parts. Yeah, so I've got 84 superchargers on 30 carbs. So it's almost a ratio of 3 to 1. So let's give it some power. So the power usage chart on, or power per fuel chart on this is again steep because it's using all of the superchargers. But at this level, it's producing at 750 power in this size area, which isn't great. It's a number of times less than the steam engines. But that is still 247 is about 65,000 power per resource, which is still damn good. If we do take it up a little bit higher, let's take it up to 0.5. So we're up to 1,400, nearly 1,500 power. 165 is 43,000, over 43,000 power per resource. If we do max it out, which is not ideal for a supercharged engine, we'll see what it goes down to. 79, 78. Okay, 78. I'll cut that down because it's making a noise in my ear. 78 is about 20,000, so it's still way more efficient than the steam engines. So next we can look at another one, which is a turbo. This is actually a hybrid. This is a turbo supercharge. So each carburetor has one turbo. The outside ones are inline turbos. And there's also superchargers in there as well, just to give a little bit more boost. So this is a hybrid engine. I didn't check on here. It was actually the power created at the highest level, but it was less than possible. So let's go here now. So first of all, 25% power. We're producing 800 power. A little bit more efficient at 228, which is about 60,000 power per fuel. And we can see the curve on this is not quite as steep. Let's take it up to 50%. So we're looking at 178, 177, which is about 46,000 power per fuel. We're still getting 15, nearly 1,600. And if we take it up to maximum, that's still going down as the heat increases. I think it's going to settle about, from previous tests, about 105. So, which is about 27,000. So it's more efficient than the supercharged engine at higher revs, and that one's sort of like an in-between sort of engine in that it's reasonable, neither good at high or low. But this this is more complex to build than this engine. The supercharged engine's pretty simple to build, just blocks. If you like working out plumbing, the inline turboed engines are the most efficient at high revs way of getting it, but heaven forbid you get one hit on your exhaust system somewhere and then it just goes completely to pot and it stops working. So this is a simpler system in that you've got superchargers, carburetors, normal turbos, and some inline. So it's an in-between, but space efficient. So what can we ascertain from this little bit of testing? So first of all, building fuel, or making fuel, is very efficient. More efficient than steam, and even the most inefficient engine is still way more efficient than steam engines. But space-wise, the steam engine in a given space, especially if you use the battery system, can produce a lot more power for blocks used compared to fuel engines. The turbine, the big turbos here with pulsed boilers, does make quite good power, and apply that to the turbine and your efficiency does multiply, but not up to the stage of the fuel engines. Now, the fuel engines, superchargers, turbochargers, inline turbochargers, they all have benefits, and it's all a matter of complexity and power efficiency per block. They're still not going to compare to the superchargers, and this is very complex to make. Although you can, I'm just saying now, I'm not the greatest at building these engines. There is people who have built engines, prefabricated engines, on the workshop and on forums that you can just copy. I always build mine from scratch rather than copying, because that's the challenge. These are good, but they're damn complex to make, and you need a lot of space in the ship. A hybrid or the supercharger is simpler to make and is efficient enough, but you need even more space. So you really got to look at how much power do you really need in your ship to define where the engine's going. But overall, fuel is more efficient, steam is more power dense. That's basically what is come out of, and you can mix them, which is something I'm going to work on some of my ships. So we have some fuel efficient engines for general use and steam engines when you need excessive amounts of power. So combine the two is also the other way to do it. Anyway, that's it for now. As I say, this is not really an in-depth test. This is just to show the different types of engines and their efficiencies and power densities, and what you can look at or need to think about when building a ship. Whether you want, if resources are not a problem, build a steam engine. If resources and fuel efficiency are a problem, build fuel engines, but don't use as much power in your ship, so you'll have less shields, etc. So basically, that's the end of it. Hope you liked the video. Give us a thumbs up. Any comments down below. Make sure my math is correct and I haven't done something wrong, because it does seem wildly different in the fuel efficiencies, which theoretically shouldn't be that big a difference, but that's the game we have, so that's the way we have to do it. Until next time, keep playing the game and have fun.